Another weekly wrap up. Andres, thank you for joining me.
Happy to hear it. It's always good.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm good. How are you?
Doing pretty good myself. Ready to jump in.
Excellent. So we've got two stories today, two interesting ones. Kentico has a new CFO, and then we'll jump into sort of DXP conferences 2023. Who's doing what? What's changing? I'm interested in that story very much so as well. But let's talk about Kentico first. What's happening there?
Yep. So feature story in DXP Report this edition. Kentico, Lucas Polak is appointed as their new CFO. He actually joined Kentico back in 2021, initially as a finance controller, and he has tons of experience, obviously, as in finance from Heineken in Czech Republic, Deloitte Czech Republic, and Honeywell Aerospace. So experience with large companies, multinational companies, whatnot. And he started building a new finance department structure back in July 2022. And in January of this year, he was appointed their CFO. Got some interesting quotes from the announcement. And this is from Lucas Polak. It was time to leave the corporate environment. I was looking for a more human company, and Kentico caught my eye. The company culture is based on cooperation, openness, and trust. It almost feels like one big family. He went on to say, I accept a role with two clear goals in mind. Firstly, I want the finance department to be a strong strategic partner for the executive and commercial teams. And secondly, I want people in my team to develop their skills and to know that their work is meaningful. And he also added that transparency is a fundamental Kentico value. It's not just a fancy word on paper, it's real. We openly communicate our results, how we're doing, and what we do to achieve our goals, including finance.
Yeah, this was an interesting story to me personally, because what Polak says in these quotes, to repeat what you said, a more human company, openness, cooperation, feels like a family. The reason it stuck out to me was because I met Peter Pallas, the now chairman of the board at Kentico. I met him when he was the CEO, the founder and CEO, I believe, way back when. I'm not really sure how many years ago it was. Definitely more than 5 years ago, I think. We met in London, and I was a journalist at the time. This was before Wordify was even launched, and he gave me a lot of time. I think we had a coffee. I can't remember the exact details of the conversation, but what I do remember, even after all these years, was he was very, again, transparent with me. He, at that time, I couldn't really benefit him much. I was like new in the space, yet he gave me that much time. He told me about the product. He told me about their vision for the future, and I got really good vibes from that meeting. He just felt very, very welcoming, very, very nice, quite frankly. And all these years later, again, I don't remember the exact specifics of the meeting, but I do remember what a nice meeting it was. Right, so I think my house is getting attacked by birds. So this just stood out to me. As like, this feels like a Kentico description, and it's nice to see that all those years later, that sort of human feel remains within the company. And we've had discussions and engagement with Kentico as well, and we have the same feelings with them. So this was nice. This is just like I felt like kind of like a feel good story in amidst what's otherwise just a sort of a normal CFO appointment. It's not really news, but I thought the news here was actually that this underlying humanness of Kentico lives on, which is nice. As a company grows, it's nice to see. So
and some of the things they mentioned in this press release was that they doubled their annual recurring revenue in 2022, and some of those profits will be reinvested, among other things, in the growth of Experience by Kentico, which is their SaaS DXP. And they also mentioned the Experience Adopters Program, which is designed to help onboard some of the first customers of Experience by Kentico in production environments. And I think that's something they probably started because, especially in last year with the split of content.ai and Kentico into like different sectors, I think helping to differentiate what product is which and onboard members in different ways can be important. But yeah, I agree. I think with what you said about like this, the type of story, I think something that startles me in this is like, I know sometimes when we see new executive appointments, it's usually someone coming completely from outside, someone coming from a previous company. Maybe they have experience in the industry or whatever, but it's usually just a fresh appointment. What I thought was important about this is Lucas had previous experience working internally with Kentico for about a year, so he knows a bit about what's going on in the company, how things are structured, the vision, all that stuff like that. So he's already been there, seen it, acclimatized, and is on board with everything. And I'm interested to see how him stepping into that role, as well as the fact that they want to reinvest some of those profits, things like the experience, how that shapes the company going forward.
Yeah, exciting time. That's always good to hear that there's surplus there that's going to be reinvested back into a product. So we hope to see big things from Kentico this year. Right, moving on. Conferences. Sitecore is doing something different this year, right?
Yep. So another story I mentioned is that there will be no Sitecore Symposium this year in 2023. So Sitecore Symposium, so like an annual conference for Sitecore partners, customers, and vendors. And instead of having it in 2023, they're going to go with regional conferences, which are tailored to meet the specific needs of different global markets. So 2022 Sitecore Sim was actually the first one they had since COVID. And the next one they plan to have is going to be next year in 2024. And in between now and then, they're going to hold a series of one-day regional events. And I think that's an interesting pivot. I know you have a few thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, firstly, it's interesting to hear that they may be going back to Symposium next year. I wonder if it will be, in tandem with this new strategy. But a new strategy, which is, it's almost symbolic, right? Because they're going from one big monolithic conference that's going like one size fits all. This is, bang, that's our conference. It is what it is. Everyone from all sectors, all regions of the world, all different sort of customer types and sizes, everyone come here and hey, it's one size fits all. It's a monolith, right? Whereas now they've said, no, we're not going to do that this year. We're actually going to do, what is, smaller, more regional, targeted conferences. So for me, I was reminded of like monolith and microservices, right? So it kind of feels symbolic in that sense, especially with Sitecore branding themselves or pivoting the way they are, right? So that's interesting. Yeah. And for me, it makes a ton of sense, right? Like I've been to a Sitecore symposium. I think it was in 2019 or 2018. And by all means, it was a nice event. As far as like tech events go, it was pretty well run. It was interesting and wasn't so boring as some others have been. But I agree with them on this strategy. There's different when your company is big as Sitecore, they already have penetration in so many different regions of the world. It's like a missed opportunity to not give each different region and again each different customer type and segment and size of customer, so on and so forth, something more personal, something more tailored to fit them, right? Just if we just look at like the very basics of it, a conference targeting US customers, your US customer base, Sitecore's US customer base must be huge. That should be very different, fundamentally different to a conference you're hosting in the Middle East, right? For Middle East, North Africa region, just purely based on cultural differences and differences in their their digital transformation journeys, right? And differences on like customer types, in one part of the world it's very government and semi-government run, the other side of the world it's total opposite. So there's a lot different there, and when you're just sort of relying on one conference to sort of serve both of those, and let alone all the other complexities that go along with that and all the other different sort of traits that your customers have, I don't think it makes much sense. So this regional and sort of more tailored approach for me makes a lot of sense. So it's good to see, and I hope it continues beyond just this year.
Yeah, and I think it will continue. I also worth mentioning is that right now we're entering into that recession. There's a lot of layoffs in the tech industry, and in the article, that's one of the things mentioned was that this could also be a bit of a cost bonus because, as you mentioned, the size of Sitecore, putting on a huge conference of that size is definitely it's going to be expensive.
Yes.
But now with the more targeted regional conferences, they can maybe assess the landscapes differently and then be like, okay, cool, we're not going to spend as much here, we're not spending as much there, and we get to that. They also mentioned that, and this is something we know as well, that Sitecore, like this sort of roadshow approach, like the roadshow touring different places, it's not something that's the first time they've done it. They've even last year they had on-tour events in Dubai, London, and several other cities to mention, and apparently it was pretty popular. And that's what Psycho CMO Paige O'Neill mentioned in the article. So it seems as if like they've tested it and say, okay, cool, this is what's going to work from us. But moving on from Sitecore, I think what's also interesting is that even though they'll be doing and the fact that like these I think Sitecore Sim used to be maybe like 2 or 3 days, something along those lines.
2 days, I think.
But yeah, and these are going to be series 1-day regional events. So a bit shorter. What seems to be happening is what I think interesting is that on one hand, you can look at this as maybe a cost-cutting measure from Sitecore, but what's interesting, like other players in the industry are kind of doubling down on conferences, and they want to push more. So like Optimizely, Shafkat Islam, the CMO, he says in 2023, we're going bigger and leaning into conferences and events more than ever before. They've held events and hosted their user conference OptiCon in San Diego, London, and Stockholm. And they plan on doing it in the same cities this year, as well as hosting a roadshow in 6 US cities, including this large areas like Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles. Acquia, they're also doing a huge push on conferences as well. Acquia Engage Digital Freedom Tour, which started in 2022, started in Miami last October. They're going to go through to Paris in June this year. Plans to hold show in New York and London in March and May. And so basically 2023, 2024 is big for Aqua and Uniform, Digital Experience Composition Assembly in November 2022. And it's just a bunch of companies that are starting to push the conference and roadshow events angle. And I think that's pretty interesting because maybe last year was probably the first year across the board, like worldwide, where we started to see, okay, cool, we're coming out of COVID. We want to hold in-person events, want to do more things in person. Because for a while, a lot of companies were just doing the digital conferences, everything virtual. But what's been interesting about the last year or so, last 6 months, probably when we factor in the layoffs, cost-cutting measures, and stuff like that, we've also seen companies remote work, for instance. Remote work's been a thing for a while. Like obviously Wordify we operate remotely. But while remote was a big push for like during COVID, obviously, just post-COVID, it's like, oh, remote's the future. We're seeing a lot more companies saying, come back to the office, guys. We want you back in the office. And it's interesting that transition is happening now as a lot of these companies are pushing more these in-person conferences, because maybe in a way that makes it easier for some. It could also be harder. So it's really just about transitioning and trying to find that balance, I think, a lot of these companies are doing between how hard they want to go in in-person events, how hard they want to go in digital and virtual events as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because after COVID, there was like this whole, the Zoom fatigue thing as well. It was like people were desperate to they weren't necessarily desperate to go back to the office, but they were sort of desperate to travel and do things in person a bit more. And so I feel like, them having these sort of events that are sort of like moving closer to the people, smaller roadshow events, that kind of thing, sort of makes a lot of sense with that in mind. People do want to get out of the house. They do want to travel a bit more and do some more sort of, networking type stuff. At the same time, like we mentioned earlier, just traveling across the world to like one monolithic event that's not really tailored towards you. And again, the fundamental problem with a big event like that is that it's fundamentally about the product itself, which is cool, which is of course what you want, but it means by definition it can't really be about the customer much, right? It's very much, hey, this is like the conference for everybody, so it's all about this new feature and this new version of the platform. Whereas when you're doing roadshow stuff, it's like, okay, in this particular city we've got these, these 7 clients or these 7 customers, and they're all in this, around this sort of industry or around this sort of size. You can start to customize things and talk to them in a way that you wouldn't talk to, again, like a semi-government company across the world, right? So it makes a lot of sense for all these companies to do this. Cost-cutting wise, it also makes sense. This is another example of cost cutting that increases the value, right? You can cut the cost, but it actually increases the value, right? I mean, I think it was at the Sitecore conference that I attended. They're looking to cut costs. I still remember they had these like salmon cream cheese puffs, fantastic. But yeah, I think you can get away with not serving those at roadshows. So there's one way to cut costs. But no, in all seriousness, it all makes sense. It all just makes it's like a no-brainer. It makes sense. It's obviously slightly more. I don't know. It'd be interesting. I've never really organized an event like that, but I imagine it would be slightly less painful to organize, like 5 roadshows versus one mega 2-day conference. I could be wrong. I'm totally wrong about that, but I kind of get that feeling. So it could be smaller investment, smaller pain to do it, and more relevant to the customer. Everybody wins.
Yeah. On that event note, so I'm not really a huge conference guy myself, and that's what you mean.
You're missing out on the salmon cream cheese puffs, and Andres.
Yeah, I know. I got it. But in all seriousness though, I've attended a few conferences. If the company I'm working with is going to be like a vendor or whatever at conference, and what you say is true. Like those big conferences are definitely more about the product, more about this, but along the way, because I remember we did do in terms of attending and being a vendor at a roadshow in the US one time, and I think that does offer a better opportunity for those smaller events, like meetup style events that can break off from those tend to be where a lot of people find value at conferences. I do know that's something that a lot of people say. They'll go to a big conference, but the real value that they get is in those smaller meetups that happen afterwards, where they have a chance to kind of interact and actually collaborate and network and talk about that. And I think these small conferences will be opportunity for that. And that's going to be important for the industry because we're in a stage right now where it's about education, it's about clarification on what, even if we go on things like products or how things are interpreted, there's still a need for a lot of collaboration and clarification on that. So I think smaller conferences in different regions will definitely make some of that stuff easier.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And just on the final point of the benefits of a smaller event versus a huge event, it kind of reminds me of when you go to see a sports game, like a football game, for example. When there's 60,000 people, 80,000 people in the stadium, you're a spectator, right? You're not you're not participating. You're a spectator. You feel like a spectator. Similarly, when you go to these big events like this, and there's thousands of people are there, and there's a lot going on. There's there's four events or 4 presentations happening at once. You feel like a spectator. You don't feel like you're participating. And although it seems okay, there's 2,000 people here today, networking should be easy. It actually makes it more difficult because it just feels like you're in a sea of people. Everyone's rushing from one end of the hall to the other and grabbing those salmon puffs and things like this. And you just feel man, I'm just there's no real way to sort of stop someone and talk. But if there's 50 to 100 people, then it feels like you're actually participating rather than just spectating. And it becomes easier to actually, speak to the person next to you, or not even the person next to you, the person across the room, because it feels a bit more intimate. So just from that perspective, I think it's hugely beneficial for everybody. But this is good news. I think this is good news for the industry that multiple vendors are sort of seeing the benefit of this.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. I think we're done. Anything else?
No, I think that's it for this edition.
Okay. Thank you again, Andres. And I will speak with you again next week.
See you next week, guys.